Hello, Joanne here. I am going to be painting a baby portrait. This is a newborn wearing a hat and sleeping. So you'll see that the majority of the picture will be the hat and the garment that this baby is wearing, and the face is, even though the focal point, it's the smallest portion of the painting. I've started with a very careful drawing. This painting is representing a real person, so the drawing needed to be proportionate and as accurate as possible. And now you see me going around the hat and wetting it all before I start adding paint. So this will be wet in wet. The hat has an interesting shape. There's a cuff, a very large cuff or band around the forehead and back of the head, and then the top part of it has some peaks. So it's not just a rounded head. So it will have some shadings. It's also knit in two colors, so you'll see me now picking up some opera rose. Looks like I have just a little bit of some orange dirt on my palette that I also may have picked up, but it does come out to be quite a strong pink. I don't want to cover it completely because of all the folds and shadings, shadows that the knit picks up. So just stroking in some various directions of the paintbrush. I'm using a fairly large brush because I don't want it to have the same detail as a photograph. Just kind of a, it's a loose painting, but when it comes to the face, it's going to be very much a tight representation. So I have the pink on, very quick strokes going in the direction of the pattern of the knit. Now I'm picking up cerulean blue, and this is going to be kind of a stripe. As you see, I'll begin trying to show the shape of that peak at the top of the hat. Bends downward and curves back up, and as you see, it's very wet. The paint brush is fairly full of water, and the wet paper and the paint itself all have quite a lot of moisture. It's very dry here, and so I wanted to be sure that I didn't start getting hard edges. You see on the top part of the hat, that right hand side is starting to dry already. At the edge, you see the pink pigment collecting right at that place where it begins to dry. But that's okay. I'm going to be doing some background color so that the garment that the baby has on will show up better. It's a white background of a snuggly that she's wearing. So here you see there's also a little difference in the shade, the amount of water that I used on the pink and the blue in the band area and in the top area, because the hat is more stretched out. There's less color showing on that band. Now wetting the face, and this I can just take water and go over the whole face. I want to be careful not to touch the hat, the edge of the hat, so I'm leaving just a little area separating the water that is still slightly damp in the hat, so that it won't bleed down into the face. So you'll see me be very careful along that line. And Once again, this brush has quite a lot of water in it, so I'm going over and over and make sure that the water that soaks into the paper has enough depth. This is Arch's 140-pound cold press paper, and it does soak it up, especially in this dry climate. So I'm bringing the brush back to the water a few times to make sure that I have everything ready to go for the color of the skin. This is just the first wash. You'll see what the skin tone looks like in just a moment here when I pick up those, again, dirty palette colors, but sometimes they magically turn out to be the best thing to use. I used to wipe my palette clean every time I did a painting, and I thought, darn, I wish I had saved that from the day before when I was painting one day, and I thought, well, I don't really have to throw these colors away, especially if I might be able to use them. I'm adding some quinacridone rose to that dirty palette there that has a little bit of orange, a little bit of yellow, makes for a nice peach color. And just swiping it across the face. We'll do this for the first wash, and after it dries we'll go back in and do shadings and detail work. I wanted to try to get a little bit of shading under the nose and around the side of the nose on this first wash, just a little bit, and also be mindful of where the light is shining. I did this off of a photograph, and the baby's head was down, so this whole face was really dark, and I'm trying to be careful to lighten it a little bit as if there was more light shining, but maintain where the shadows were and where the brighter parts of the face would show up. So under the eyes, under the nose would be a little darker, and then the nose itself and the cheeks would be a little bit lighter. You see me dropping in a really strong pink there. Looks a little scary, but you see how it moves as soon as I drop it in. It's still very wet, so that gives me time to work with it. And so this is, even though it's still the first wash, I wanted to start with some of the color. I had a little bleeding going into the hat, so I just need to take a damp brush, wipe it off, and pull that away. So now along the face, around the nose, underneath the nose. There are actually two lips there, but they're hard to see at this stage. I'm adding more color and darkness to the bottom part of the face there. But you can see now the face is less than a third of the dimension of the sketch. So I had a little extra pink. That first dot of pink that I put on there sucked right into the paper. It was really strong, but there's nothing wrong with that. That actually turned out to look quite realistic. There's just a little bit of pink in the cheeks of the photograph. So I had made the eyes pretty strong, pretty heavy pencil mark so that I wouldn't cover them up. Again, trying to be realistic. I wanted to be sure to see those pencil lines as I painted, especially in the second layer of color that I put in there. The other parts, the mouth and the nose, you can't see too well, but I was able to see those through the transparency of the watercolor throughout the whole process. The garment, the hat didn't really matter so much. I actually had a lot of fun doing both of those, because if it matched the photograph, that's fine. If it didn't, that's fine. But if the photo of the baby's face looks one way and the painting looks another, then it just doesn't work. So the garment is an ivory color with some folds. It's starting with the folds on the side there. This is wet on dry, so the paper is dry. I didn't want it to be bleeding very much while I was putting in some hard lines to create the look of the folds. There are lots of shadows on the photograph, and I was making choices as I went, dropping in some of that gray, and then taking a clean, damp brush and moving the pigment around a little bit. Certain places I wanted a hard line, and I had too much water there, so I'm dabbing it away. And then other places allowing it to fade into the surrounding area. More of the hard lines are at the top, and the bottom of those lines is where I was pulling the color. That gray is just a mud color. I usually keep the well at the top. My darker shades, I have neutral tint and burnt sienna up there at the top, and that top little well is where I just always know that it's going to be dark. Sometimes I add ultramarine to get a really true, beautiful gray. That's what you're seeing a little bit here. And it worked quite well because there are little gray stars on this fabric, randomly dropped in. And because I had just wet the paper with the color that I put in there, that light gray, I can drop some darker, just little dots, and they spread and look like stars. So that worked out very nicely. You can see the size of them just growing ever so slightly as the water moves that pigment into a star shape. Now I'm using very clean water because I don't want that shading in the top part, but I do want to put the stars in. There are also some pink stars that I'll be adding, and those are bigger. So I started with the gray ones. There's a cute little moon right in the center of the front. So lots of clear water. Now I'm going to be doing, here I'm picking up quinacridone rose. Do a pretty big drop of that pink, going after it, dabbing it, encouraging it to spread a little bit. Just didn't want to use too much water, then it would dilute too much and you wouldn't see it as well. Here's where I'm putting in a moon shape. If you have enough water and it doesn't dry too quickly, you've got a lot of opportunity to adjust how bright or intense the color is, adjust whether you want to pick something back up. The way I made that moon there is a little bit too big, so later before it dried, I was able to touch that bottom part of the moon and make it a little smaller, and you see how nice those star shapes come out. I wanted to fade away those grays. Now adjusting the value of the gray and the pink. once again, I want the focus to be on the face, so I wanted to blur out a little bit of the detail that I had dropped in with the gray stars, adding just a little more pink. At this point, I'm not looking at the reference photo to see where the stars are and where the pinks and the grays are. Just looking at it from an aesthetic perspective, what would be pleasing to look at. Just getting a little extra water going there, and time for some more gray stars. Trying not to put them real evenly spaced. Some are close, some are far, some are bigger, some are smaller. And that's starting to look like a lovely little flannel swaddle. Another thing that is always good to think about, especially in a situation like this where you have three segments, you have the hat, you have the face, you have the swaddle, is to use similar colors, similar pigments. The pink in the hat and the pink in the swaddle were not realistically the same pink, but for the painting, it's nice to use that same opera pink and quinacridone rose. I used both of those to get various shadings. The opera pink is brighter, and the quinacridone rose can be muted down more easily, and so it gives some cohesiveness to the painting in the final version. Okay, I'm just looking it over, thinking whether or not to add any more to that swaddle fabric, and deciding that perhaps it's time to let it dry, and then I will come back and begin working on the detail of the face. Alright, I have a number 2 round brush. I believe it was a Grumbacher, and it's a synthetic brush. Very nice springiness to the hairs, and holds a nice amount of water. You see how much water it's able to move around there, even for a small brush. I'm bringing a little bit of the brownish, orangish color into the pink color, and thinking I want to be a little darker than the way it's going to end up, because of course watercolor always dries lighter, and there's a pretty significantly dark corner right there in the upper part of the face. Just paint in the dark color, and then take a clean damp brush and smooth the edges so that it will not have a hard line there. Deciding where else I want to have some of that darker color. Drop in some paint, put it in the shape it needs to be, and then go back, clean the brush, and get some clear water to soften the edges. What I'm doing mostly thinking about through this part of the process is not so much, oh, this is a nose and there's the bridge and there's where the light's hitting the top of the eyelid or the top of the little button nose there. I'm mostly thinking about shapes. Is this a curve? Is this a straight line? Is it a point? Is it a rounded edge? How much intensity in the value of the color should I be putting in. So I've started with that darkest corner of her face because now I can compare everything else to it. If I'd started with some of the lighter shades, I could go about it in the opposite order, but I always like having the darkest value available to me to refer to as I'm painting other parts of the face and deciding how much of that more intense value needs to go in. There's a little crease underneath the eye there that part of that pencil line. The edge of the eye and the eyelashes are pretty dark, almost black. So I'm also thinking about that those, I can't put those in first. I have to do the skin tone first and then put the darkest value of the eyes in last, but to have that skin tone is really helpful. There's always a little shadow underneath the edge of a hat, so you'll see me going back and forth with that one. I think what I did was accidentally got some water on the hat itself, just at the very edge, and I had to keep going back to it. I had to bring that moisture back down. I was dabbing it with the tissue there, and sometimes doing it with my damp brush to draw away some of the moisture. For me, this was tricky. The eyes, not as much as the nose. It's always been kind of a mystery to me how noses are shaped and how to make them look realistic. And so I had the photograph. I was referring to it, especially through this process of getting the face shapes to be right. I'm also not too much in a panic about that corner that looks so dark. I was thinking, oh no, maybe I put too much darkness there. It's pretty easy to lighten things up, but it does start to make a painting look overworked. If you put it in, it starts to dry. Now you add more water. Now you scrub away a little bit, or dab away, or rub away a little bit of the pigment. Now does it look right, or do you need to rub more, or do you take too much away and have to add back in? So the paper, it takes a beating. That's why you want to always have the best quality watercolor paper you can afford. It just wears a lot better, and the pigment spreads a lot more easily. And especially for a portrait, I would recommend 100% cotton, good quality watercolor paper. So there I am fiddling around with the nose. Oh my goodness. And just the slightest little change in the curvature of the line can make this person look like another person. It just doesn't take much to do that. And there I am looking at the value of that part of the cheek, thinking it needed to be lighter. It looked darker. Again, as I said, it was in the shadow on the photograph that I was using, and so I kept forgetting to look at the overall painting for the value as I was looking at the photograph to try to match that value. So sometimes the photographs are better left once you have the shape and the sketch right. Just put the photograph away. But as I said, I was trying to make sure this one looked realistic. Always a good challenge for portrait painters. I have recently gotten a subscription to Pixabay. It's a huge collection of photographs that are in public domain, free to be duplicated. And I think the next portrait that I paint, I will take somebody that I don't know, and I don't have to try to match as closely as this. And once again, I go by the shapes of things, the shape of the eye, the shape of the nose, the shape of the mouth, the overall shape of the face and head, and see how it turns out. I'm supposing that it will be a little less stressful. This was great fun. I didn't mean that I didn't have a good time doing this, but I just kept looking, like right there, I looked at that and I thought, oh my, what have I done? And then I knew I had to take some of that pigment away and leave some of it there, and actually that looks pretty realistic right around the nose now. Alright, so we're making progress on all of these shadings. I'm looking at that chin and thinking there was quite a big shadow that shows up on the garment. It looks like the shadow is more on the garment than it is on the bottom of the cheek. And also I'm thinking that I need to define that lip. Another kind of scary moment, because that also can look like the person or not. It's a little tricky. There's quite a heavy shadow underneath that as we're looking at the left. It's actually her right side of her face where I'm touching there with the paintbrush. So once again, I was going by the photo but not wanting to overdo the shadows because I was making everything a little bit lighter value. Alright, I think I'm going to speed things up a little bit now so that you can see what process, or what the progression looked like, but not have to go painstakingly through it. right, here we are back in normal speed again for the last couple of minutes as I'm touching up the eyes, trying to add a little depth. I had painted on line to begin with, that dark edge of the eyelid and the lashes, and I'm adding some color, a little more color to the eyelash, or to the eyelid itself, and lightening up a little bit on the edge, the darker color of the edge of the eyelid, and scrubbing away with this tiniest little brush. This is a very nice brush that has long enough bristles to hold some water, but there are hardly any bristles there. It's so fine, and it works really well for not only painting on those tiny little eyelashes, but also working. It's a brute of a brush. It's very, very sturdy. I've used it for several years, and it just works so well. It was kind of expensive. It's all natural fibers, and so I like using it for these very tiny details. A little more color, a little more of the flesh tone at the edge of the eyelid is going to help balance out the values. Again, I didn't want to have so much heavy black, but I also wanted to be sure that she looked the way she looks, which is with some pretty dark eyes. Just checking. As I'm doing this, I'm looking closely to get the detail, and then I'm sitting back and looking at it from a little bit of a distance so that I can get a different perspective. It always helps to see in a different way from a different distance, sometimes even holding it up in different light so that it will inform me as I'm making the final details. Once again, trying to make this look realistic. And so here it is, the final painting. I put a little light blue background, you see, with that edge, so you can see better the garment. Thanks for watching.